Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Symposium on Wyoming's Energy Future, co-sponsored by the Wold Foundation and the School of Energy Resources. I'm John Kazuba. I'm the John and Jane Wold Centennial Chair in Energy, and I'm a School of Energy Resources professor of geology and geophysics. Organizing this conference is part of what I do as being an endowed chair from the Wold Foundation, but I think more importantly, it's about giving back to the community, to the foundation, to SER, and to the broader community that has helped make much of what I do possible. We had this conference 2 years ago, and it was very well attended, and it was very successful. So we're pleased to convene it again this time around. This time around, we're weaving in a little bit more about economic geology into Wyoming's energy future, as that has become a big part of the economy that drives the energy transition. And holding this chair has been very important for me because it's allowed me freedom to pursue high-risk, high-reward research. And you're going to see a little bit of that research summarized by one of the students who sits on one of the panels today. We look at how fluids, such as water, oil, gas, hot water, hydrogen, interplay with rocks in the subsurface and what that means for energy and economic geology. Our goals for today are to come together and look at Wyoming's energy future and how this is going to play a role in driving the economy and the energy society for Wyoming and beyond. We have 3 panels and 3 keynote speakers. Panels are on critical materials, on conventional petroleum resources, and on surface issues that cross-cut all energy and economic geology development. We also have 3 keynote speakers that I'm very excited about. One to talk about a recent geophysical survey in Wyoming that underpins much of economic geology advancement in the state. We're going to have a speaker about the new age nuclear reactors, if you will. Nuclear energy has become a big part of Wyoming. And then we're honored to have a keynote address delivered by Governor Mark Gordon. Each of the panels will have a moderator and several panelists. They represent industry, policy, and research. And we took this diversity of approach because we want to, A, foster diversity of communication, and B, we want to model this kind of communication, collaboration, cooperation, and interdisciplinarity to the students who are here, because they're going to be the leaders of industry and government tomorrow. We have about 200 people registered for today's conference, and they're from all walks of energy and economic geology. That's the petroleum industry, that's the economic geology industry, that's academia, government, NGOs, and of course, many students. Students, I'd like you to feel comfortable to network out. Introduce yourself to somebody who looks like a professional. It's the people who are older than you. And just reach out and tell them what you do and why you're interested. And if they've been on a panel, feel free to ask them a question. And to the professionals in the room, feel free to reach out to a student, ask them who they are, what they do, and why they're here today. And go around. We're putting up posters as the day goes on for the poster competition, which will be judged by the end of the day. And you'll see the diversity of energy research and economic geology research that goes on at the University of Wyoming. And I think you'll be really surprised and pleased at the broad diversity and really challenging cutting-edge research that's being done today. Couple housekeeping items. We are not doing a simulcast of this. People are here, but we are recording it. And once the recordings are available, we'll post it on the website. You'll have URL links to be able to look at each of the panels and each of the keynote addresses. And that'll be on the SER website, and we'll also put out an email about that to you so you can go online and download those. And when you do that, you can pull down the recordings from 2 years ago, because those are available as well. If at any point throughout the day you have any questions for our speakers or the panels, you've got a notepad and pencil on your desk, feel free to write the question, hold it on up for our student runners, and they'll come and grab that and take it to the head table, and then we'll get it to the moderator for the panel. I'd like to thank the Wold Foundation and their family for their generosity in supporting the Wold Chair that helps to make this and my work possible. And I'd like to thank the School of Energy Resources, and particularly I'd like to thank Christine Reed and Peyton Hayes for organizing the symposium, as well as Glenda Thomas with the Wold Foundation for everything she does to help make this all possible. For all the panelists and the moderators, I thank you for your time and energy for being here. Your bios are available in the agenda and the program that's available and on the QR code that's on the desk. And also, I'd like to acknowledge my students, most of whom are here today, because, frankly, they make me look good. And I appreciate their energy, youth, and all the work they do. Thank you, Ellen, Sophie, Brad, Emily, John, Michael, and Abby. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. She has a long bio that I'm not going to read, but she has taken SCR to new heights, and she's always charging people with keeping one thing in mind, what's best for the state of Wyoming, and I always appreciate that, and part of what we have today is because of that. So help me welcome Holly to the podium.
Thanks so much, Sean. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm really humbled by the level of attendance, and special shout out to the students who were able to come. I know it's not always easy to make time for these events. Thank you so much for being here. In fact, if you're a student at the University of Wyoming, please stand up. Thank you, guys. We have a really wide range of disciplines represented here by these students, so please take time to talk to them. And if they're too shy to come talk to you, now you know who they are. So thank you all so much for being here. As John said, I'm Holly Krekka, Executive Director of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. And one of the great things about being in Wyoming and getting to work at the School of Energy Resources and across the state with our energy sector is that this is an energy state. And we have a superpower in that how small we are. We have such close access to our lawmakers, to our executive branch, to the energy industry, to our students, to our land-grant university here in Laramie. And so we're able to work together to advance Wyoming's interests on very complicated energy issues. And so this is really a place where one person can make a difference. And a big part of our role is outreach and having meetings like the one today. So please don't be shy with your questions. Let's talk about issues. If you don't understand something or you want to go into more depth in an area, please pass your questions up. We have major challenges in the energy sector in Wyoming and across the nation, but we can be proactive and we can work together to address those issues. And that's what today and our work at the School of Energy Resources is all about. We were formed to support the state and its energy sector, and our mission at SCR is to promote energy-driven economic development. We have many partners: the Wyoming Energy Authority, the State Geological Survey, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Governor's Office, the legislature, our institutions across the University of Wyoming, Western Research Institute, like the list goes on, and we're working on Wyoming's behalf. We were placed here at the University of Wyoming to have access to all the great work and tenure-track faculty across the institution, and people like John who can train and educate tomorrow's generation of energy workforce, come up with new ideas and do cutting-edge research. And then the School of Energy Resources can work with those folks and our industry partners and across the state to really advance big projects out in the field. And we have a lot going on right now. At the heart of a lot of our work is economic geology, and that's why we're focusing specifically on that area, although we have some broader topics that are going to be discussed today as well. I am not a geologist, but I've had the opportunity to travel the state with some of the best geologists, in my opinion, in the nation that were right here in Laramie. And while it takes longer to get places when you look at every rock, you can learn a lot and it's fun. So I know a lot of people come to Wyoming for its exceptional geology and for the expertise here. And it all starts with our incredible faculty and our students here at the University of Wyoming. And we try to keep that talent here in Wyoming at the School of Energy Resources by bringing in competitive grants that they can stay here in Laramie and work on Wyoming energy issues and issues that face the nation. It's a really big honor. So thanks again to the Wold Foundation and the Wold family for working with us on this conference. They've been a great partner to us in many things, including the Endowed Chair and putting this event on. Thank you all for being here. And to kick off our discussions, it's my honor to introduce our next speaker. So Court Wold is a partner at Wold Companies. He plays a key role in managing and expanding the family's oil and gas portfolio. He began his career in energy banking and comes from a finance background. He's traveled the nation in this work, focusing first and deeply involved in the Anadarko Basin and the shale boom, and has been involved with horizontal drilling programs in both Texas and Oklahoma. Following the sale of prior companies he worked for, Court joined his father Jack and his uncle Peter as a partner at Wold Companies, and together they oversee a diversified portfolio of oil and gas assets across 10 states. He lives in Denver with his family, and he serves on a lot of nonprofit boards. And so please join me in welcoming my friend Court Wold to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here and a privilege. My name is Court Wold, and on behalf of my father, Jack, and Uncle Peter and the Wold Foundation, I'd like to welcome everybody here. Holly, thank you very much, and John, thank you for your great work. I've spent much of my career in the oil and gas industry in Wyoming, and have had the privilege working across horizontal drilling, midstream projects, and now predominantly the minerals and royalties and non-op space, which fortunately has taken us all across the state in several basins. And what you're going to hear today is that it all starts with the rock. And we are so blessed in Wyoming with great rock. I want to briefly touch on 3 ingredients for success in the energy business. Number 1, capitalism in this great country. Number 2, Wyoming's natural resources. And number 3, human ingenuity, which is showcased in this room today. So number 1, capitalism. In today's world, and particularly I think this week, it's been easy to get caught up in the negativity that we see in the news and around our country. But we can't forget that we live in the greatest country that's ever existed across the world. With 8.5 billion human beings growing to 10 billion in the next 10 years, there are only 1 billion those of us that have access to low-cost hydrocarbon energy sources that are available and enabled by free markets and capitalism. There's no alternative way of improving the lot of ordinary people that can hold a handle to the productive activities that are unleashed by free enterprise. Our free ideas drive innovation, competition, and enable all of us to grow and to compete with one another to improve the lives of those around us. So whether you're a student, an entrepreneur, or an executive, the only limits are those that you place on yourselves. There's no better place to reach your potential than in the United States of America, and we can't forget that. Number 2, Wyoming's natural resources. Our family has predominantly been in the oil and gas business, which has taken us across the country, and whenever we go outside the Wyoming, we end up usually coming back because we come back to certainty of regulatory environment and good rock. And that combination delivers achievement and profitability in a number of different energy sectors, and they all matter. From coal to wind, Wyoming has built industries that have shaped and are shaping the world. Last year, Wyoming produced 97 million barrels of crude oil and 1.25 TCF of natural gas, which makes us one of the largest producers across the world. We're well positioned to lead. We have a regulatory framework that a lot of people in this room are working on, and we need certainty of regulatory environment in order to attract capital, which will drive business and to drive success for this state. And thirdly, and most importantly, human ingenuity. And we'll call that surrounding ourselves with smart people. Surrounding yourself with smart people and thinking outside the box is essential. Today, we're in a room full of some of the brightest minds in the state, executives, students, educators, and professionals, collaborating and working together with diverse perspectives. And those diverse perspectives matter. They make projects stronger, and they make us as groups of human beings stronger. They make us more resilient. So for those of you with more gray hair in the room, take a young person under your wing, teach them something, ask them questions. And for those of us that are coming along in our way and early in our careers, find a mentor, ask questions, and you surround yourself with smart people. When we have free markets like we do, and we're blessed with in the United States of America, and vast natural resources like we do in Wyoming, and smart people with perspective, we have everything we need to succeed. And that's what today is all about. So I look forward to the many discussions today, and welcome. And with that, I'd like to introduce one of those incredibly brilliant people that we're surrounded by today, the Wyoming State Geologist, Erin Campbell. In this position, Erin serves as the director of the Wyoming State Geological Survey and as a commissioner for the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission and the Enhanced Oil Recovery Commission. In her current position, she directs the WSGS and serves as a cabinet member for the governor of Wyoming. Erin, thank you for being here and welcome.
Well, good morning, and I'd like to start by saying a huge thank you to Dr. John Kazuba and Dr. Holly Krutka for the honor of an invitation here, and also to the Wold Foundation. Thank you for making this happen. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to share information on the geophysical data we've been collecting over Wyoming. Although John said one geophysical survey, and I'm going to tell you about all 6. But I'll start by telling you why we're collecting the surveys, and then I'll tell you about the surveys themselves. So to start with, this slide shows the Rawlins Municipal Airport with 2 of the helicopters that were used to collect data over central Wyoming. Next slide, please. Oh, there is. Okay. Great. Everyone in this room is probably familiar with critical minerals and why they're important, but we'll do a quick refresher anyway. So according to the definition of critical minerals, they are not just minerals, they're elements and materials that are necessary for life in society today and our advanced technology that we require. But supply of these elements are not necessarily secure. So in terms of uses for critical minerals, there are a number of uses listed on this slide. We're going to focus on the energy uses, and because this is an energy symposium. So critical minerals are crucial for our transition to renewable energy technologies, but every form of energy has a cost. And in terms of renewable technologies, that cost is critical minerals. An electric car requires about 6 times the input of critical minerals and other minerals than a conventional car. A wind plant requires about 9 times the mineral input for an energy equivalent fossil fuel-fired power plant. And pretty much everything in our society is reliant on these critical minerals, and the demand is set to triple by 2030. So that is not very far away. In terms of supply, This slide shows data from the International Energy Authority in their report from last year, looking at sources for critical minerals. This chart shows the percent market share of the top 3 producing countries for 4 critical minerals that I've highlighted here. They have many more in their report. But as you see, the U.S. has very little production. And if you look at cobalt, 80% of it is sourced from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which tends to have episodes of political instability and civil unrest, and quite a bit from China, where at times we can have strained relationships between our leadership. And then, of course, there's Australia. You got to watch those Australians. But in order to develop our broad, inclusive energy portfolio and not be as reliant on these potentially unstable sources, we need to develop domestic resources. And, there we go. So fortunately, we've had a bipartisan support on focus for development of domestic energy, domestic critical mineral resources. Most recently, we have the Critical Minerals Security Act, again, which has bipartisan sponsors and support. It's currently with the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, on which our own Senator Barrasso is ranking member. But also of note on this list is the 2022 funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which gave $510 million to the USGS and even more to the Department of Energy. And Wyoming has been the beneficiary of quite a bit of this funding, through both of these avenues, some to the Wyoming State Geological Survey and some to the School of Energy Resources. Now, of this $510 million that went to the USGS, $64 million per year was dedicated to the Earth Mapping Resource Initiative, or Earth MRI. And that's a program that was started in 2018 to locate critical minerals in the United States, and it was allocated to state geologic surveys. So if you look up there at 2018, you'll also see that at that time, the USGS was tasked with identifying which minerals and elements qualified as critical in the United States. So on this slide, it shows those lists. They had an original list in 2018, and every 3 years, they recalibrate their list. So on the right is the 2022 list. So how have these changes on the list affected Wyoming? Well, removing helium and uranium was not great for us. The ExxonMobil LaBarge helium facility produces about 25% of the world's supply of helium. However, that means the supply chain is not subject to disruption, so it's not critical, and it was removed from the original list. And uranium was also a loss for us, but uranium is counted as an energy mineral, which is now handled by the Department of Energy and not the USGS, who is deciding this list. But uranium is another area where we don't have to worry about supply chain disruption in the United States. Wyoming has the largest known uranium resources in the U.S., and also Wyoming was one of the last states to stop production of uranium in 2021, and it's on track to be the first to start uranium mining again. In fact, that's already happening. So it doesn't qualify as critical, and it's also a non-energy mineral. But the good changes for us that we saw on this was that nickel and zinc were added to the list, especially nickel, which is a main target of the Visionary Gold prospect in Fremont County. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what do we have in Wyoming? Well, we have about 36 of the 50 critical minerals on the USGS list. For instance, we have quite a bit of rare earth elements, titanium, vanadium, platinum group elements, cobalt, and nickel. And whether or not they're developed depends on determining how much is present and if it can be produced economically. So how do we determine that? Well, at the Wyoming State Geological Survey, we do the baseline geologic work to entice companies to invest in the detailed exploration, and SCR is also participating in this. So our very first step is geologic mapping to locate what kind of rocks there are and where they're found. And then we do some preliminary geochemical analyses. So different rock types have different critical minerals associated with them. And so to figure out which rock type has which elements, we do the geochemical analyses of these rocks. So this map kind of breaks down rock types into different groups that contain consistent types of critical minerals. And the location of 4 of the largest and most publicized areas of mineral development are circled in red. So the different rock types have different types of critical minerals, and the different rock types are shown in different colors on here. So let's start with the light yellow. That is coal-related. Those are coal-related critical minerals. And the circle there up at the top in the center is the Ramaco prospect, looking at rare earth elements at Brook Coal Mine near Sheridan. Now, this is what's called unconventional critical mineral exploration because it's targeting non-traditional sources. A traditional source would be more like hard rocks, like granite, and that's what the State Geologic Survey tends to work on. Unconventional sources are coal fields, produced water, and mine waste, and SER is specializing in that area. So in this prospect, the Ramaco prospect, rare earth elements are hosted in clay, minerals, and organic matter within the coal, as well as layers within and around the coal seams. Now, the rocks here are lower in concentration of rare earth elements than the traditional hard rock prospects, but because these rocks are easier to mine and the infrastructure is already in place, they're economic at much lower concentrations. Now let's move to the east, to the upper right corner where the pink is with the red circle. Those are volcanic and shallow intrusive rocks, and this is more traditional mining in hard rock. So this is the Bear Lodge rare earth element prospect at Bull Hill Mine that is with Rare Element Resources. And they were ready to take this towards mining in 2014, but that was put on hold when the market dropped. And the company now is still doing estimates to determine when the rare earth element demand will increase with the type of rare earth elements that they have, which will be primarily used in magnets. But they are very active in terms of rare earth element processing. They are working with DOE and General Atomics to develop a proprietary rare earth element extraction facility. Moving down to the southern part of the state and central part of the state in orange, these are old rocks. These are 1 to 3 billion year old rocks, and they can be anything from pink granites to metamorphic rocks or dark mafic rocks. And these have been traditional sources of mining claims in the state for a long time, and now they're of interest for critical minerals. And 2 of our 4 biggest prospects in the state are found in these Precambrian rocks. Down in the southeast corner is the Hallett Creek prospect in the Laramie Mountains, and that is with American Rare Earths. I believe Joe Evers is here to speak on the next panel. And so I won't steal any of your thunder. But they are looking at pink granitic rocks in the Red Mountain Pluton that are 1.4 billion year old rocks, and they're finding rare earth elements in the allanite minerals. And then in the center of Wyoming, in the orange rocks, in the orange color on the map, that's where Visionary Gold is finding nickel and cobalt in 2.5 billion year old rocks. These are dark green and black serpentinized ultramafic rocks. And Visionary recently received a recommendation for $1 million grant from the Wyoming Energy Authority to conduct some detailed electromagnetic geophysical surveys over the King Solomon prospect and other nearby prospects, with some additional drill programs following. So that's a synopsis of the mining exploration that's going on in the state. And so at the Wyoming State Geologic Survey, as I mentioned, we try to do the preliminary work to get the companies interested, to get them a little leg up in the state and get moving a little faster. So it helps to have these preliminary results. So we focus on the geologic mapping and the geochemistry. And so these are the current projects where we are doing geochemistry. We've completed the yellow and the green. That's the Laramie Mountains, and that was funded by Earth MRI, and then looking at sedimentary rocks across the state in green. That was funded by the state of Wyoming. And currently we're working on the areas shown in orange and purple. The orange is the Medicine Bow Mountains, and the purple is the Phosphoria Formation, and they're both funded by Earth MRI. But what about the areas between the sampling locations? What do? You can't be everywhere. Sampling takes a lot. It's a lot harder than it sounds. What about areas under trees and under vegetation? And that's where geophysics come in. So here are the geophysical surveys that have occurred and are occurring in the state. So on the map, you can see Lander, Casper, and Cheyenne and Rollins marked on there to help you orient where you are. And the areas in bright colors show places where geophysical data have already been released. So earlier this year, we released the magnetic and radiometric geophysical data over central Wyoming. And actually, just last night, our press release came out for the data over the Medicine Bows. So those are brand new data that just came out. Now in hatch marks, that's the Sierra Madre geophysical data that was just completed their flights last week, and those helicopters moved straight to the pink zone over the Laramie Mountains, and they are just starting to fly there. And a low-level flight advisory just came out for that survey over the Laramie Mountains. And as we learned over the Medicine Bow Mountains, you don't want to fly during hunting season, so they are going to stop their flights at the end of this month, like when rifle season starts. Anyway, the area in red is where we are contracting a brand new survey. And that one is funded by the state of Wyoming. The legislature allocated $2 million to the Geologic Survey for those surveys, those airborne surveys. And that will connect our central Wyoming survey with the Laramie Range, and also will cover the Hartville Uplift. And we have gotten a lot of interest from industry on here. We sent out a mailer to all the companies we were aware of asking if anyone was interested in participating. And there is a company that would prefer not to be named where or who, but they are going to participate, and they're getting some more detailed data collected over their prospect. So what are these surveys? How do they work? So you take a helicopter or a fixed-wing aircraft, depending on the terrain. If there's a lot of change in topography, it has to be helicopters. If it's flat, you can have the less expensive fixed-wing aircraft. And they fly back and forth 100 meters over the surface. And that's why you have to have a helicopter if there's a lot of topography. And so they're flying flight lines about 200 meters apart, which is not that far. And they put tie lines to connect those lines. The tie lines are about 2,000 meters apart, but they're flying really fast, over 90 miles an hour. So you can imagine if you're standing there with your rifle and you're stalking some elk, and the helicopter comes 100 meters above you at 90 miles an hour, you're not going to be very happy. But for data, it's great. So they are there. Sometimes there's concern from people. What are these doing? What are they collecting? But there's no photography, no video. It's only collecting passively emitted signals from the rocks. And so the equipment on board is a magnetometer for the magnetic data, a spectrometer for the radiometrics or radioactivity, a GPS for location, and an altimeter for altitude. And what's exciting about these surveys, as I mentioned before, is they can see through the trees. So places where you can't get to the rocks, where there's trees and soil, the geophysical data can be collected, for the magnetics can be collected through the soil, so you can see what's happening underneath. And it helps you track these mineralization trends over much greater distances than you can on foot. And this has been a wonderful example of collaboration between the state and the federal government. If you see, we started with $450,000 from the USGS. How this began was the state of Wyoming submitted a number of prospects of mineralization areas that we thought had potential for critical minerals to the USGS, and then they started selecting different states for different surveys. They first offered us in 2021 $450,000 for the Medicine Bow Mountains, the data that were just released this week. Well, the state of Wyoming, the legislature, very wisely pitched in $50,000 when they weren't even required to. It wasn't a required match, but they showed that Wyoming had skin in this game. As a result, then we got $3.1 million for the survey that is shown in the hatch marks that was just finished flying. That came from the USGS, and it does span into Colorado, but a majority of it is in Wyoming. So the USGS funded us again. Then the state of Wyoming put in $2 million for the Central Wyoming Survey, which was the data that were released earlier this spring. Then the USGS came back with can't see it from here, $2.8 million. And that is the pink area, the Laramie Mountains. Then the state of Wyoming came back with another $2 million for the red area that's being contracted. And then we also got another call from the USGS and said, we'd like to run electromagnetic surveys. And so if you look down at the map on the bottom, that green outline, the area in blue are the surveys in the big map, but there's a huge swath that they're going to cover with electromagnetic data. And that is much more expensive to fly. And it has, I'll tell you a little bit about it in a bit, but it came out of the blue. It's going to be fantastic for understanding the regional geology and mineralization. So again, it's been federal, state funding, and it just keeps increasing. So let's talk about the data themselves. Radiometric data are primarily used for mineral exploration, and it's collected with the gamma ray spectrometer, and it's measuring radioactivity. Now, it only reads right at the surface. So you're only going to see the soils and the rocks right at the surface. And it's going to record the potassium, uranium, and thorium signature. This map is from the Central Wyoming data that were released last spring. And this is a map of the uranium signature. So you can see the bright pink area in the middle of the survey. Those are the Granite Mountains, where we know near Jeffrey City there was uranium development at one time. So we're seeing a very strong, very bright color there for the uranium signature. For all of these, the color scheme is blue and green are low values, pink and red are high values. So that's an example of the radiometrics. They're a little more difficult to interpret than the magnetic data, but they still can be very valuable in terms of rock type identification. Now, the aeromagnetic data are collected by that Q-tip that's sticking out the front of the helicopter. That is the magnetometer. Since it's reading magnetics, you want it far from your metal in your helicopter, but it's measuring the intensity of the magnetic field. And it can be used in mineral exploration, oil and gas, because it sees deep below the surface, and also geothermal and fault mapping. So rock types vary in terms of how much magnetic content they have. This depends on the kind of minerals they have. And the magnetic mineral may not directly relate to a critical mineral, but usually you'll see similar groups of minerals in similar types of rocks. So you can trace where you might see rocks that do have critical minerals in them. And again, this measures to a depth of up to 1 kilometer. So you can see what's happening in the subsurface, and it sees right through the soil and the trees. So here's an example of the old magnetic data from Central Wyoming. Now, it's still, it looks pretty good, but when the USGS flew this in the 80s, they were covering the entire United States, not just focusing on Wyoming. Was definitely not a 200-meter flight line spacing. So if you compare it to the data we have now, it is an unbelievable difference in terms of what you can see. The old data are in the background, the new data are in front. Incredibly high resolution. The bright pink that you see there are the Granite Mountains. We can see the Granite Mountains fault along the southern side of it. We can see faults we hadn't recognized before in these data. And I'm going to zoom in on the upper corner. There's a little inset there. We're going to look at those data a little more closely. So this is up by the Rattlesnake Hills. And remember, we're looking at contrasts in magnetic signature. So when it goes from pink to blue, you have a really sharp contrast. So these bright blue dots you can see in those data, right? If you compare them to the geologic map, they correspond with volcanic rocks, very young volcanic rocks. And those volcanic rocks have historically hosted gold mineralization. And we've already heard from a mining company who's working up in this area that these data have really helped them hone down where they want their claims. They've released some claims. They've picked up new claims as a result of these data. So they're really helping with mining understanding where they're going to find their resources. Now I'm going to flip to a next slide where I have annotated these features so you can see things a little more clearly if you're not used to interpreting these data. Okay, there are the lines. I'm going to go back for a second so you can see before and after. So I've circled those volcanic intrusions that have the really low magnetic signature. And I've also highlighted the faults on the map that you can see pretty clearly in the magnetic data. I'm going to go back and forth again. So look at the magnetic data where the faults are. You can see a really sharp line on the magnetic data. But what's also really interesting here is if you look at the big pink triangle on the lower right side of this map, if you look at the geologic map, there's nothing there. It's just flat sedimentary rocks, young sediments. But there's something in the subsurface that we are unaware of. So this will be an exciting thing to look at as we interpret these data. Okay, these are the Medicine Bow Mountains data that we just released, and you can access on the USGS website. And we also have it loaded on one of our online GIS maps if you just want to view the data and you don't want to work with the data. On the left are the magnetic data. Again, incredible detail on here. And on the lower right of that, you see that purple half circle down there? That is the Lake Owen Ultramafic Complex. And that is an area that has been of interest for mineral exploration for a long time. And there are companies interested. The USGS is doing detailed geochemical surveying there as well. But we knew that would be an area of interest, so we actually flew those flight lines 100 meters apart instead of 200. We wanted really good data across that Lake Owen complex. And then on the right are the radiometric data. And again, they're a little harder to read, but on this triangle, you can see that blue is uranium, red is potassium, and green is thorium. And so you can get an idea of what types of minerals you might find using that radiometric data. So this is a recap of where the data, the magnetic and radiometric data have been flown or are being flown or are planning to be flown. But as I mentioned before, we have this really exciting new electromagnetic survey. And the reason they're doing this location all the way from the Sierra Madre Mountains in this half circle up to the Black Hills is because it follows what's called the Cheyenne Belt. It's a suture zone where two large provinces collided 1.78 billion years ago, and a lot of mineralization takes place along those suture zones. So this will help us, again, look under the surface and see the kind of mineralization trends that we can't see just by mapping and collecting samples. And the way these data are collected, this emits a signal and reads it. So the helicopter will have this big circular disc towed below it, and it sends out the electromagnetic signal and it records the resistivity or resistance to that electromagnetic. But we are very excited about those data as well. That will be a couple years in the making. So to close, this is a photograph from the Laramie Range where the survey is currently flying. And I just was grateful to have the chance to give you an update about the airborne geophysical surveys that are taking place in the state. Sounds like we have time for a couple questions. Yes. Oh.
Bring a microphone. Sure.
Richard McPherson. Are you using satellite data?
We personally are not using satellite data. The USGS is utilizing satellite data.
In 1983, a foreign firm using our satellite data found gold in the state in the United States, and they've been mining it ever since.
Noted. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for your talk. I found it very, very, very interesting. On that last survey, you mentioned it's surface and subsurface information, the one that goes from the Sierra Madres to the Black Hills. How deep on the subsurface data or subsurface information can you go?
Well, with all of these data, it's the depth also relates to the strength of the signal. So if it's a strong signal, you'll be able to see it deeper, so maybe several hundred meters. If it's a weak signal, even if it's closer to the surface, you may or may not see it. What's exciting about the electromagnetics is it can identify differences in fluids. So you can see the resistivity of different fluids, salinity, and things like that. I think there was a question in the back.
One more.
Sweet.
Good morning. My name is Camelia Opodu. I'm a professor of botany here at the University of Wyoming. And my question to you, I was just wondering, any idea of collecting air quality data because I wonder, you're talking about mineralization, some of these things, especially areas where we have high arsenic, any look at the air quality or thinking about how these trace elements or critical elements may affect the groundwater in those areas?
That is a very important question. And that is not an area that we're addressing at the Wyoming State Geological Survey, but I believe the USGS is looking at those sorts of interactions because they have a biological group there as well.